I can't handle you anymore.
Jam.
Jam, please.
It's not what you think.
Then why were you hiding him from me? You've been meeting him.
You don't understand.
Leave. You need to hear her first.
He's not who you think he is.
Then who is he?
It's from Lagos.
Every week. Who is that?
I didn't know how to tell you.
How long have you known?
I can't handle you anymore, the Korean mafia boss told his wife. Then he caught her with another dark mafia boss times African woman slow burn romance. The penthouse was quiet in the way that only expensive places could be quiet. No traffic noise, no creaking pipes, just the low hum of central air and the occasional clink of ice settling in an untouched glass of whiskey. Rose stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Seoul high-rise, watching the city lights blur beneath a curtain of rain. 6 months of marriage, and she still hadn't gotten used to how far up they lived, how small everything looked from here, how insignificant. She'd stopped being surprised, a long time ago, by how much her life resembled a cage with a very good view. Behind her, she heard him enter. She didn't need to turn around to know it was Kang Jam. She recognized the weight of his footsteps, unhurried and deliberate, the same way a lion doesn't hurry when it already owns the room. "You didn't come down for dinner," he said. "I wasn't hungry. You're never hungry anymore." His voice had an edge to it tonight, sharper than usual. "You're never anything anymore, Rose. You just exist, in my house, like a ghost." She turned then, arms crossed over her chest, chin lifted the way she always lifted it when she refused to let him see her flinch. "Maybe that's because you built a house for a wife, not a person." Something moved behind his dark eyes, something that might have been hurt if Kang Jam were the kind of man who let hurt reach his face. He was not that kind of man, not in front of anyone, not even her. "I can't handle you anymore," he said quietly. The words landed like stones dropped into still water, rippling out until they touched every corner of the room. Rose felt her throat tighten, but she refused to let it show. "Then let me go." "That's not what I meant." "Then what did you mean, Jam?" Her voice cracked despite her effort to keep it steady. She hated that it cracked. "You married me to save face with the CO family. You gave me a title, a ring, a house full of guards who won't let me walk to the corner store alone, and you call that a marriage. You disappear for days. You don't touch me. You don't talk to me unless it's to remind me of the rules. And now you stand there and tell me you can't handle me. What is there to handle?" "I've given you nothing to handle. You haven't let me." For a long moment he said nothing. The rain kept falling outside, streaking silver down the glass, and somewhere far below the city carried on, indifferent to the two people standing 400 feet above it, both too proud to say the thing that mattered. "You're right," he finally said. "I haven't let you be my wife. I haven't let myself." He stopped. His jaw tightened, and whatever he'd almost said, he swallowed it back down like poison. "Forget it." "I have a meeting." He left. He always left. That was the shape of their marriage, approach, retreat, like a tide that could never quite decide whether it wanted the shore. What Rose didn't know, what she wouldn't learn until much later, when the truth arrived with blood already spilled, was that Kang Jam had not been walking toward a meeting that night. He had been walking away from the only thing in Seoul he was afraid of losing. To understand how a mafia boss and a foreign woman with nothing to her name, but a suitcase and a stubborn spine had ended up married, you had to go back 14 months, to a rooftop bar in Gangnam, where neither of them had wanted to be. Rose had come to Seoul from Lagos on a design fellowship, the kind of opportunity that made her mother cry proud tears over a bad phone connection. She was 26, brilliant with textiles and pattern work, and utterly unprepared for a city that swallowed newcomers whole if they weren't careful. She'd been careful. Until the night her fellowship's closing gala turned into chaos, a rival business faction crashing the event to send a message to the gallery's primary investor. Tables overturned, glass shattering, security guards suddenly outnumbered by men in dark suits who moved like they'd rehearsed violence their whole lives. Rose had frozen near the emergency exit, evening gown snagged on a chair, when a hand closed around her wrist and pulled her into a stairwell seconds before a table crashed through the space she'd been standing in. "Move when I say move." the man had said. Korean accented English, low and controlled, like he gave orders to armies for breakfast. She'd looked up into the face of Kang Jam for the first time, sharp-jawed, unreadable, a thin scar tracing his left eyebrow, and felt something she refused to name settle low in her stomach. "Who are you?" she demanded, even as he pulled her down 3 flights of stairs. "The reason you're not dead," he'd answered. "You're welcome." She hadn't thanked him. She'd elbowed him hard in the ribs for manhandling her, which had earned her the first genuine laugh she would ever hear from Kang Jam, short, startled, almost boyish, gone as quickly as it came. That should have been the end of it. A strange, violent night, a rescue, a goodbye. Instead, 3 days later, she discovered that the gallery sponsoring her fellowship was quietly owned by a shell company that led, through 4 more shell companies, back to the Kang family. And that the rival faction who'd crashed the gala had marked her, an outsider with connections to foreign investors, as useful leverage. Kang Jam had not saved her out of chivalry. He'd saved her because he needed her alive and grateful, a foreign national with no ties to Seoul's underworld, someone he could marry to launder a piece of his empire's reputation, and more practically, someone his enemies would think twice about touching once she carried his name. That was the marriage proposal, when it finally came, 6 weeks later, in a private dining room with lawyers waiting outside the door. Not romance, but strategy, delivered in the flat, businesslike voice of a man who had learned very young that feelings were liabilities. Rose should have said no. She had for 3 days. Until her visa complications resurfaced, until threats she didn't fully understand began arriving in whispered warnings from strangers, until the ugly truth settled over her that in this city, without protection, she was exactly as vulnerable as Kang Jam said she was. She married him with her spine straight and her eyes dry, telling herself it was survival, not surrender. She hadn't expected to fall in love with her captor. She hated herself a little, every day, for how close she'd come to it anyway, for the nights she caught herself waiting by the door for his footsteps, for the way her pulse still leapt every time that thin scar over his eyebrow caught the light. She hated it more because he never once gave her a reason to believe he felt anything back. 3 weeks after the night Kang Jam told her he couldn't handle her anymore, Rose met Daniel Ackhafer. He arrived at the penthouse on a gray Tuesday afternoon, announced by the head of household staff, as a visitor from the Nigerian consulate, and Rose had nearly wept at the sound of a Lagos accent in her own living room for the first time in over a year. Daniel was warm where Kang Jam was cold, easy with laughter where her husband rationed his like, it cost him something physical. He'd been sent, ostensibly, to check on the well-being of Nigerian nationals connected to prominent Seoul households. A routine visit, he said, though something in the careful way he glanced at the security cameras made Rose wonder if routine was the right word. "You look like you haven't laughed in months," Daniel told her, settling into the chair across from her with the easy confidence of a man who'd grown up privileged and never quite lost the habit. "I haven't," Rose admitted, surprising herself with her own honesty. He came back the following week, and the week after that. Always during the hours Kang Jam was at his offices downtown, always with some reasonable pretext, paperwork, a signature, a just checking in. Rose told herself it was harmless. She was starving for a piece of home, for a voice that didn't carry the weight of danger behind every syllable, and Daniel gave her that freely, asking nothing in return except her company. She didn't tell Kang Jam about the visits. Some small, wounded part of her wanted to keep one thing that was only hers, 1 hour a week where she wasn't anybody's wife, anybody's asset, anybody's leverage. Just Rose, laughing at stories about jollof rice arguments and Lagos traffic, in a language that tasted like home in her mouth. She didn't know that Kang Jam already knew about every single visit. His men reported to him before Daniel's car even left the parking garage. He knew Daniel's name, his consulate credentials, his hotel room number, the flight he'd taken in from Abuja. What he didn't know, what gnawed at him in the sleepless hours after midnight, packing his office 2 floors below their bedroom, was why his wife hadn't mentioned it. Why she'd hidden it. Whether the warmth in her voice when she spoke to this man on the phone, warmth he'd overheard once and then hated himself for eavesdropping to hear, was warmth she'd never once offered him. Kang Jam had faced down rival bosses with guns pointed at his chest without his pulse changing. He found he could not face the thought of his wife's laughter belonging to someone else without something in his chest turning to ash. He told himself it didn't matter. He told himself their marriage was business. He told himself a great many things, in the weeks that followed, that were lies. The night everything came apart began ordinarily enough. Kang Jam had canceled a meeting for the first time in longer than he could remember, told his second-in-command Min-ho that he had a private matter to attend to, which was as close as he'd come in years to admitting weakness in front of another man. He came home early. He told himself it was to surprise her, though the truth, buried somewhere he refused to look at directly, was that he'd come home to catch her in something, to confirm the suspicion that had been eating him alive. He found the penthouse quiet, the household staff dismissed early, his wife's doing, he'd learn later, so she and Daniel could talk without an audience of watching eyes and wagging tongues. He found them in the study. Daniel was standing close to Rose, too close. Kang Jam's mind supplied instantly, though later, when he forced himself to remember the scene honestly. Close had meant a hand on her shoulder, steadying her as she wept, nothing more. Rose was crying. Real tears, the kind she never let Kang Jam see, streaking down her face as she clutched a folded letter in her hands. "Rose!" His voice cut through the room like a blade unsheathed. She spun around, and for one unguarded second, Kang Jam saw something in her face that gutted him, not guilt, but fear. Fear of him. Fear of what he'd think, what he'd do, what this would cost her. "Jam, it's not what. Get out," Kang Jam said to Daniel, and his voice had dropped into the register his enemies knew and feared, the one that had no room left in it for civility. "Now." Daniel, to his credit, didn't run. He raised both hands, stepped back with careful, deliberate slowness. "Mr. Kang, I think there's been a—" "I said get out of my house." Rose stepped between them, small and furious and shaking. "Don't you dare touch him." "Don't you dare, Jam. You don't even know." "I know what I saw." His voice had gone terribly quiet, which was worse, somehow, than shouting. "I know my wife has been meeting another man in my house for weeks, hiding it from me, and I know I find her crying in his arms tonight. Tell me what part of that I'm misunderstanding, Rose. Please, enlighten me." "He's my cousin." The words hit the room like a thrown glass, shattering the tension into 1,000 confused pieces. Kang Jam went very still. "What?" "Daniel is my mother's sister's son." Rose's voice shook, but she didn't look away from him. "He works for the consulate. He's been visiting because I asked him not to tell you, because I was scared of what you'd do, because you never let anyone near me who isn't cleared through 6 layers of your security, and I just wanted one person in this city who knew me before I was somebody's wife." The letter in her hand trembled. "And tonight he came to tell me my mother is sick. That's why I'm crying, Jam. Not because of some affair you've apparently decided I'm having. My mother is sick, and I'm 11,000 kilometers away, married to a man who can't even say he cares whether I'm happy, and you walk in here and accuse me of—" Her voice broke entirely, and she turned away from him, shoulders shaking. Kang Jam stood frozen in the doorway of his own study, the certainty that had carried him in, the righteous, burning conviction of a wronged husband, draining out of him and leaving something far worse in its place. The understanding that he had let jealousy make a fool of him in front of the one person whose opinion of him he actually cared about. "Rose." His voice had lost every trace of its earlier coldness. "I didn't know." "Of course you didn't know." She didn't turn around. "You never ask. You just assume and command and retreat and expect me to read your silences like scripture. I am so tired, Jam. I am so tired of trying to love a man who won't let me close enough to actually do it." The word hung in the air between them, unmistakable, undeniable. Love. She hadn't meant to say it. Kang Jam could see that in the way her whole body went rigid the instant it left her mouth, as though she could physically claw it back if she tried hard enough. Daniel, wisely, chose that moment to slip out of the room entirely, murmuring something about giving them privacy that neither of them heard. For a long, suspended moment, husband and wife stood on opposite sides of a study that suddenly felt very small, both of them undone by a word that had escaped before either was ready for it. It would have been a clean enough turning point. Misunderstanding cleared, feelings finally spoken, the slow work of 2 guarded people learning to trust each other beginning at last, if Seoul's underworld had been in the business of clean turning points. It was not. 3 days after the confrontation in the study, Min-ho came to Kang Jam with a face carved from granite. "Boss, we have a problem." The problem had a name. Cho Di-sung, head of a rival syndicate that had spent 2 years circling Kang Jam's territory, waiting for a weakness to exploit. Cho had learned, through channels Kang Jam would spend weeks unraveling about Rose's cousin's visits to the penthouse, and rather than discovering the innocent truth, Cho's intelligence had drawn the same wrong conclusion Kang Jam initially had. Worse, Cho intended to use it. "He's planning to leak a story," Minho said. "To the tabloids, to your rivals, to anyone who will listen. Your wife, unfaithful, humiliating you publicly. It doesn't matter that it's false. It only matters that people believe it long enough to make you look weak. A boss who can't control his own house, they'll say, can't be trusted to control his territory." Kang Jam's expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes went cold and sharp as winter steel. "And if that fails?" Minho hesitated. "If the story doesn't land the way he wants, our sources say he has a second plan. He'll go after her directly, make it look like retaliation from a jealous husband, pin a tragedy on you that the whole city will believe, because everyone already thinks you're capable of it." The room went silent except for the low hum of the city outside the windows. Kang Jam had built his reputation on being untouchable, a man too dangerous, too controlled, too many steps ahead to ever be caught flat-footed. He realized in that silence that Cho Di-sung had found the one flank he'd left completely undefended. Not his empire, not his money, not his men, his wife. The woman he'd married for strategy and had somehow, without ever meaning to, fallen helplessly in love with. "Move her to the safe house in Bukshan," Kang Jam said. "Tonight, full detail, no exceptions. She won't like that. I don't care what she likes. I care that she's alive to be angry with me about it." Rose did not, in fact, like it. "You're locking me away again," she said flatly, standing in the middle of the unfamiliar safe house with her arms crossed, refusing to sit, refusing to soften the hard line of her jaw even as 4 of Kang Jam's men positioned themselves outside every door and window. "This is exactly what I told you I couldn't live with, Jam. You disappear into your danger and hand me a cage and call it protection. It is protection." Kang Jam's voice was tight with a tension she hadn't seen in him before, not the controlled coldness of their early marriage, but something rower. Fear, she realized slowly. He was afraid. "Cho Di-sung wants to hurt me. I won't let that happen. Then let me help you stop it instead of hiding me from it. Rose, I am not a piece of glass, Jam." She crossed the room and stood directly in front of him, close enough that he had to look at her, really look, instead of past her at the danger he was so used to facing alone. "I survived a gala massacre without your help before I even knew your name. I've survived being married to a stranger who wouldn't tell me anything about his own life for a year. I am not asking you to stop protecting me. I am asking you to stop protecting me instead of trusting me." Something in him cracked open then, some final wall he'd spent his whole adult life reinforcing, brick by careful brick, against exactly this kind of vulnerability. "I'm afraid," he admitted, and the words seemed to cost him more than any threat he'd ever faced down. "I have spent my whole life being afraid of nothing, Rose, because nothing mattered enough to be afraid for. And then you came into my life like a storm I didn't order and couldn't control, and now I am afraid of everything. I'm afraid of losing you to a bullet meant for me. I'm afraid of losing you to a misunderstanding, the way I nearly did 3 nights ago. I'm afraid of loving you so much that it makes me weak exactly when I need to be strongest." Rose's breath caught. In 14 months of marriage, he had never once spoken to her like this, no walls, no strategy, no careful distance. "You called me a ghost," she whispered. "That night, you said I existed in your house like a ghost. Because I was a ghost first." His hand came up, hesitant to cup her face, as though he still expected her to pull away. "I made myself absent from my own marriage because presence meant risk, and risk meant you could be used against me, and I told myself that distance was love, when really it was just cowardice wearing love's clothes. I don't want distance." Rose leaned into his palm despite every instinct that told her to protect her heart from a man who could still, in one breath, break it completely. "I want you. All of you. The parts you're afraid of, and the parts you hide, and the parts you think are too dangerous to let me see. I didn't marry a strategy, Jam. Somewhere along the way, I fell in love with a man. I would just like him to stop running from me long enough to let me love him properly." The kiss that followed was nothing like the careful, distant courtesy that had defined their marriage until now. It was 14 months of restrained longing breaking loose all at once, his hands finally certain in her hair, her fingers finally allowed to grip the front of his shirt and pull him closer instead of holding him at arm's length. When they finally broke apart, foreheads resting together, both breathing unsteadily, Kang Jam murmured against her lips, I take it back. What I said that night. Which part? That I can't handle you. His mouth curved, the ghost of that rare, startled smile she'd only seen once before on a stairwell over a year ago. I can't handle not having you. There's a difference. Their reconciliation, tender as it was, bought them only a handful of days before Cho Di-sung's plan accelerated. Min-ho arrived at the safe house before dawn with news that scattered the fragile peace they'd built. He's moved up the timeline. Word is he's planning to strike within 48 hours before you can fortify her security any further. And boss, he's not going for the tabloid story anymore. He's going straight for extraction. He wants to take her. Rose, who'd insisted on being present for every briefing rather than sequestered in another room like a piece of furniture, felt her stomach drop even as her spine straightened with resolve. Take me where? Leverage, Min-ho said grimly. If he has you, he controls Jam completely. Your husband would burn his entire empire to the ground to get you back, and Cho knows it. That's exactly what he's counting on. Kang Jam's jaw was a hard, flat line. Then we don't let him get that far. How? Rose demanded. You can't watch every door forever, Jam. You said it yourself. He's patient. He's been circling for 2 years. If we just keep hiding, he'll find an opening eventually. We need to end this, not outlast it. Absolutely not. The words came out sharper than he intended, fear disguising itself as anger the way it so often did in him. You are not putting yourself anywhere near that man. I'm not asking your permission. Rose held his gaze, unflinching, the same stubborn fire that had first caught his attention on a chaotic, glass-strewn night over a year ago. I'm telling you what I'm willing to do to protect the life we're finally starting to build. If Cho wants leverage, give him a version of leverage that's actually a trap. It took the better part of a day, and every ounce of persuasion Rose possessed, to bring Kang Jam around to a plan that terrified him more than any confrontation he'd faced in 15 years of running his territory. Using Rose, carefully and with an overwhelming net of protection around her, as bait to draw Cho Di-sung into the open. If anything happens to you, Kang Jam told her the night before, voice low and rough in the darkness of their bedroom, I won't survive it. I need you to understand that. Not the empire, not the reputation, none of it will mean anything to me without you in it. Rose pressed her palm flat against his chest, over the steady, anxious drum of his heart. Nothing is going to happen to me, because you are going to be exactly as thorough and terrifying as your reputation says you are. I trust you, Jam. Completely. Trust me back. The trap was set at a gallery opening, deliberately public, deliberately reminiscent of the night they'd met, a detail Rose had insisted on with a small, defiant smile. If this is how it started, let's see if he's brave enough to finish it in the same place. Kang Jam's men were positioned in every conceivable location. Rooftops, service corridors, unmarked cars along every possible exit route. Rose wore a discreet earpiece and moved through the crowd with the practiced calm of a woman who had, over 14 months, learned to hide fear behind grace. Cho Di-sung made his move an hour into the event, not personally, but through 2 men who approached Rose near the coat check under the guise of an admiring conversation about the artwork, close enough to steer her toward a side exit before anyone noticed. They noticed within 4 seconds. Kang Jam's men closed the trap so fast and so completely that neither of Cho's men had time to draw a weapon before they were subdued, restrained, and separated for questioning. Cho himself, watching from a car 2 blocks away via a hidden camera one of his men wore, understood the trap the instant it snapped shut. He was gone from Seoul by morning, his network scattered by Kang Jam's swift and merciless retaliation. His 2-year campaign against Kang Jam's territory ending not with the triumphant strike he'd planned, but with a humiliating, total collapse. Kang Jam found Rose standing exactly where his men had intercepted the danger, hands trembling now that the adrenaline had nowhere left to go, and he crossed the gallery floor in long, urgent strides and pulled her into his arms without a single thought for who was watching. You were magnificent, he murmured into her hair, his own voice unsteady with relief. Terrifying, magnificent. You were thorough, Rose said against his chest, laughing shakily. Terrifyingly thorough. I've never been so grateful for your paranoia in my life. In the weeks that followed, the story of Kang Jam's marriage changed shape in the whispered conversations of Seoul's underworld. No longer a tale of a boss too weak to control his household, but of a man who had built, quietly and against every instinct of a life spent guarding against vulnerability, a partnership formidable enough to dismantle a 2-year threat in a single night. Rose's mother recovered from her illness with the help of specialists. Kang Jam quietly flew to Lagos without being asked, a gesture Rose discovered only by accident, and which undid her far more thoroughly than any grand declaration could have. Daniel became, without either of them quite planning it, a regular presence in the penthouse, no longer a secret, no longer a suspicion, simply family, the way he'd always been meant to be. And on a quiet evening many months later, standing at the same floor-to-ceiling windows where Kang Jam had once told her he couldn't handle her anymore, Rose felt his arms circle her waist from behind, his chin resting against the top of her head as the two of them watched the same city lights blur beneath the same rain. "Do you remember what I said to you that night?" he asked quietly. "Vividly. I've been thinking about better words." His voice was low, warm with an ease that had taken over a year of careful, deliberate unlearning to reach. "I can handle you, Rose. I can handle all of you, the stubbornness, the fire, the way you refuse to let me hide from my own feelings. I don't want the version of this marriage where I handle you from a distance anymore. I want the version where we handle everything together." Rose turned in his arms, tilting her face up to his, the ghost of that rare smile already forming at the corner of his mouth in anticipation of her answer. "Together," she agreed. "Sounds like exactly the kind of danger I can live with." Outside, the rain kept falling over Seoul, indifferent as ever to the two people standing high above it. But this time, for the first time since the night they'd married, neither of them stood alone in the silence.